our students from the Mary C. Cole Hall at the University of the West Indies. Let me acknowledge as well, they're in the gallery, all the members from my constituency of St. Andrew Eastern, and all my people them from Ty Dixon who are watching online. We have members of G2K here this afternoon as well in the gallery. Let me acknowledge Miss Natasha Marzoff, IDB Country Representative, Jamaica, who's in the gallery. My husband, who is traveling, but I know he's watching online. I want to acknowledge him as well. All my colleagues here in the House, my friends and family, my counselor from St. Andrew Eastern, members of the media, thank you, as always, for carrying the good news about this government. Madam Speaker, I want to pause to acknowledge the media persons who traveled over hills and valleys to go to Ty Dixon to check out the district where we come from. And to write a nice article about Ty Dixon and me. Madam Speaker, I hope all the media persons who went to Ty Dixon stopped for a moment on their way there or back to enjoy the beauty of the Worthy Park Sugar Estate located in the plains of the Vale of Loidas. With its unending acres of sugarcane as far into the horizon as you can look. Madam Speaker, the scenes have always held me in awe from my childhood days until now. But Madam Speaker, there are other memories. In my childhood, many hardworking men from Ty Dixon would wake up before cock crows and walk the 5 miles in the wee hours of the morning from Ty Dixon to Worthy Park Sugar Estate to cut sugar cane in the boiling hot sun with them cutlass. Many women did the same journey as well, but to pick oranges. At that time, there were thriving orange groves. So thank you to the media for your visit to Ty Dixon. The people them when we grow up with said them love the attention. Additionally, your social media post highlighted and reminded me that my mother used to sell cornmeal pudding and potato pudding under a tree to school children at Ty Dixon Primary School. Madam Speaker, with the little my mother made from selling cornmeal and potato pudding, she would faithfully put aside something, no matter how small. And it was that faithful putting aside of a little of the money she earned from selling cornmeal and potato pudding that allowed her to buy our school uniforms and a pair of Batter Shoe Store crepe. They call them sneakers nowadays, for each of us children every year, so that we did not have to walk barefooted to school and we did not have to wear the washed out, faded out uniforms. Madam Speaker, it is the experience of putting aside something, no matter how small, that still lives on in me. Madam Speaker, it's not where you begin, it's where you end. Yes. And I want to thank Mr. Vegas and others in social media who understood the message of 1-1 cocoa full basket. Rome was not built in a day. Take your hand, make fashion, who stood up in social media against the nonsense videos about $2,000 Pro Box. Madam Speaker, let me caution the opposition and their supporters about how they talk about Pro Box. Currently, there are 23,423 Pro Box vehicle owners in Jamaica. So be very careful that you don't disrespect Pro Box. Be very careful. Be very careful. Be very careful that you don't disrespect Pro Box, which is made by Toyota, the largest car manufacturer in the world.
Minister, it would appear that the members would like to be here until 9 o'clock tonight.
Madam Speaker.
Please allow the minister to present
Madam
uninterrupted.
Speaker, it is a vehicle that has been around for 20 years and has been a resounding commercial success for Toyota. It is fuel efficient and has very good aftermarket value. So be careful how you speak about Pro Box. Madam Speaker, it's not where you begin, it's where you end. It's not where you start, it's where you finish. Madam Speaker, we've come to the closing hour of the budget debate for fiscal year 2025-26. Madam Speaker, our Prime Minister, the teacher, the professor, the builder, has given us a history lesson that should be required reading for all of us so that we do not repeat the failed policies of the opposition, not the experiment with democratic socialism where everything is owned by government, not the hyperinflation years of 1973 to 1991 with inflation ballooning to 80%, not FinSoc that cost us US $3.4 billion, not the freeing up of the foreign exchange market without adequate foreign currency reserves. Madam Speaker, those are only some of the failed policies when the opposition was in government that are still reverberating today, meaning the impact of the failed policies are continuing and still have serious negative effects. Madam Speaker, we're not making excuses. These failures are hard for our economy to overcome. They are the equivalent of putting 100-pound weights on our athletes and saying to them, run and win gold medals in champs and the Olympics. Impossible, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, when we remind people about history and the failed policies of the opposition when they were in government, it is to help them to understand that we have not totally freed our economy of the drag on GDP growth that those failed policies still have up to today. Madam Speaker, if we did not have FinSAC deal to deal with, think of how much better off we would be as a country. Think of all the resources we would have at our disposal to invest in economic growth. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister has made the National Housing Trust a big part of his growth agenda that will continue to bring decent housing to all who are in need. Madam Speaker, my one word for the Prime Minister's presentation is brilliant. From beginning to end, brilliant. Madam Speaker, the spokesman on finance put forward promises. Madam Speaker, the spokesman on finance put forward promises, but no costing. The leader of the opposition put forward more promises as well, but no costing. They also came with their recounting of history. Sadly, Madam Speaker, it did not include FinSAC and the long-lasting drag that the homegrown financial sector collapse has had on the Jamaican economy, even to this day. Madam Speaker, in both of their speeches, not a word was said about FinSAC, not an apology, not an acknowledgement. It was as if FinSAC never happened. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker,
Members,
Madam Speaker, the leader of the opposition spent a lot of time talking about the NHT. The first proclamation he made is that he will stop the annual extraction of the $11.4 billion from NHT to fund the budget. He said he would set aside 1% of food import tax, which would be $2.5 billion per annum. He promised employers an increase in the employer tax credit to 40% from 30%. He went to town, Madam Speaker, decrying securitization. Right? The government is taking future revenues today, All told, between opposition leader and spokesman, they made promises upon promises upon promises. But did they give the Jamaican people any idea of how much those promises would cost? And whether or not that they would have to cut back on something to do what they're promising? No. They said they are united with fresh ideas and solid plans, ready. But let's see if indeed that would be the case. Madam Speaker, allow me, Madam Speaker, to demonstrate to the people of Jamaica that the promises from the opposition would create FinSAC 2.0. You see, Madam Speaker, the opposition put forward a lot of words with few figures. But within all those pages and pages and pages of words is a budget, an implied budget, Madam Speaker. And it is that implied budget that I would like all Jamaicans to understand, because it has serious negative ramifications for our future. So, Madam Speaker, let's begin. I will lay out, side by side, the central government's budget for fiscal year 2025-26 and the opposition's implied budget for that fiscal year as well. These are the headings, starting with chart number 1. Yes.
Fictitious.
Madam Speaker, I rise. Yeah. Madam Speaker, I rise on a point of order because the minister is misleading the House. We did not present an implied budget for the coming fiscal year. We presented our proposals, our policy commitments for the next PNP government, and we have never said that they will be implemented in the current fiscal year. They are... As has been said, the budget, after today, the budget would have been passed for the fiscal year. Our proposals represent what we will be doing for the duration of our first term in office. And that is what we were saying. And they will all operate within the current fiscal rules. Stop misleading the House.
Dismiss it. That is no point about it. Turn on our mic. A point of disorder. Julia. Julia.
Minister, you may sit for a little until the House is ready.
One cousin, relax on the speaker rule, you know. What? You can't run from this, you know.
Members, let me remind you, the public is hearing nothing of this discourse. Nothing of this discourse. If you're not on the mic, you're not being heard. So could we allow the Minister of Finance to conclude or to close the debate? Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, this is a budget debate. And anything you put forward has fiscal implications. So, Madam Speaker, because I was interrupted, let me start again. Madam Speaker, allow me to demonstrate to the people of Jamaica that the promises is a budget, an implied budget is a budget, an implied budget. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, they did not put forward, Madam Speaker, they did not put forward an explicit budget, but they put forward ideas. And those ideas can be costed, and they should have been costed and made into a budget. So, Madam Speaker, let us begin. Again, I will lay out side by side with the central government's budget for fiscal year 2025-26 and the opposition's implied budget for the fiscal year 2025-26 as well. So, Madam Speaker, as I indicated last week, the tax revenue that the central government is projecting, Madam Speaker, I do need some protection from the noisy gallery over there. Madam Speaker, as I indicated last week, the tax revenue that the central government is projecting for fiscal year 25-26 is $994,494,000,000. This is represented on the screen, chart number 2. The opposition did not have any objection to that figure. They didn't put forward any opinion as to whether or not that revenue figure is too high or too low. So I'm taking that as an implied acceptance. And so I will give them on their side of the ledger $949,494,000,000 in their column as well. Our tax revenues represent a 5.9% increase over what we collected for fiscal year 2024-25. That is coming to a close. That's a little bit above inflation, no wild assumptions, plus, Madam Speaker, we already subtracted all the give-ups in that figure. It's not to come. We took it out of the revenue projections already. And that cost was $9.2 billion. That's the cost of the good news that we presented, yes. So, Madam Speaker, I'm going to add that back to the opposition's column because, to be fair, those were our give-ups, not theirs, right? So we're going to put it back there. Right, those are, right, so we put it back. We put it back on their side of the ledger, right? Yes. So in the next chart, we move on to the next line item in the budget, non-tax revenues. These non-tax revenues, Madam Speaker, they include the $11.4 billion from NHT. They include asset sales, any share sales, for example, Trans-Jamaica. This is also where we put distributions from public bodies. And this would be where we have securitizations. They don't like that, so they can't get it. No, Madam Speaker, do you remember how the opposition leader declared that he would stop extracting the 11.4 from NHT, and that securitization is us taking revenues from the future to spend in the present, and something about, and you know, yes. Well, Madam Speaker, we cannot put any revenues from that in their column. Right, nothing. We would offend them if we did. So nothing there, Madam Speaker. So we move on to the next item, the bauxite levy. Madam Speaker, we are projecting to receive $812 million in bauxite levy. And we will put that same amount, bauxite levy, on their side of the ledger as well. Yes. I know the opposition loves bauxite levy. Yes. They may even want to increase this number in their explicit, not their implied, their explicit budget. Yes. Because it was Michael Manley-led government who, after all, took on the transnational bauxite companies and imposed the 1974 bauxite levy. Yes. So they have a history with levies. As the history was written, Madam Speaker, in May 1974, Prime Minister Manley announced that Jamaica would repeal previous agreements Madam Speaker, as the history was written, in May 1974, Prime Minister Michael Manley announced that Jamaica would repeal previous agreements with the bauxite companies and impose a production levy on all bauxite either exported from or processed in Jamaica. Madam Speaker, anyone can read the history books about how that turned out. Revere Bauxite Company closed its shutters little more than a year later on August 19, 1975. Reynolds folded and left Jamaica in 1984. Alcoa also temporarily closed its gates in Clarendon on February 6, 1985. Yes, Madam Speaker. Yes, Madam Speaker. Jamaica did get increased earnings from the bauxite levy, which went from US $19.2 million in 1973 to a whopping US $180 million in 1974. But, Madam Speaker, the levy also moved the cost of Jamaican bauxite from being the cheapest to the most expensive worldwide. In an article entitled "The Bauxite Levy 40 Years On, Who Let the Puss Out of the Bag?" the author quoted Dr. Davis and economist Dennis Morrison as saying that Jamaica has little to show from the bauxite levy and that the country suffered through ill-fated projects and misspending of the bauxite levy funds, which were lodged to the Capital Development Fund. The upshot of all of this, Madam Speaker, is that bauxite companies began increasing their investments, not in Jamaica, in other bauxite-producing countries, and Jamaica consequently lost its position near the top of the ratings as a world-leading producer. Another failed policy of the opposition. And as the bauxite left Jamaica, so did high-paying jobs. The opposition spokesman has some nerve, Madam Speaker, talking about low-paying jobs now. It's your government failed policy that sent the high-paying jobs in the bauxite industry packing. But, Madam Speaker, I digressed. Let me get back to the implied budget of the opposition. All right, so the next line item is capital revenue. We are phasing out this line, so there's no money there because it's incorporated elsewhere in the budget. So we move on to the next line, which is grants. We're projecting to receive $5.9 billion, call it $6 billion in grants. We will put that on the ledger of the opposition as well. So those are the revenue items, Madam Speaker. On our side, we expect to see revenue and grants of $1 trillion, $96 billion, and $83 million. On the opposition side of the ledger, they have an implied budget of an implied revenue of $965 billion, $443 million, because they don't want any securitization or NHD contribution or other non-recurring revenues. They especially don't like securitization. And they figure, Madam Speaker, if they speak badly against securitization over and over and over and over again, Jamaicans will begin to think it's a bad thing, because after all, the leader of the opposition was a partner in a very big financial sector company, and so he must know a thing or two about securitization. And if he says he doesn't like securitization, then Jamaicans probably would conclude that something is wrong with securitization. But I want to say to Jamaicans, there is nothing wrong with securitization. The global securitized market is massive, nearly US 13 trillion. Research shows that 73% of residential mortgage debt is funded by securitization. 16% of auto loans are funded by securitization. 27% of commercial real estate debt is funded by securitization. 7% of credit card debt is funded by securitization. 8% of student loans are funded by securitization. 40% of multifamily debt is funded by securitization. 1 trillion of corporate borrowing is funded by securitization. The securitization market, while having roots in the late 18th century, with debt securitization, was modernized with the structured financing of mortgage pools in the 1970s, and has grown significantly since then. So, Madam Speaker, I believe the opposition leader can stop now trying to drum all the negatives into the heads of Jamaicans about securitization.
House Leader, the member's time for speaking has expired.
Madam Speaker, the member's time for speaking having been expired, I beg to move that the minister be granted sufficient time to allow for the completion of her presentation. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Thanks, House Leader. The question is that the minister be allowed sufficient time to complete. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we now move to the costing of the give-ups, the promises the opposition announced. So, Madam Speaker, the spokesman on finance said that they would pay back the asset tax that is levied on the financial sector in 5 payments. So first, Madam Speaker, the spokesman on finance would have to stop taking the asset tax before he can start paying back for what was taken. Otherwise, he would never finish paying back.
Members.
A point of order. The member for South East St. Andrew said nothing about giving back asset tax. He talked about phasing out the tax over 5 years, not giving back the revenue already collected in 1 year. The minister is again misleading the House, and she must stop doing it. On securitization, I never said that securitization is in itself wrong. I said the use of the proceeds to fund the recurrent budget, using future revenue to meet today's expenses is what is wrong. And she's again misrepresenting the position.
So, Leader of the Opposition, members, please, Leader of the Opposition, I hope you'll appreciate that this is not a cross debate. And members, I am ruling, and the ruling stands. So, Opposition Leader, you have been allowed the leeway to rise on a point of order twice, to offer some clarification to what was said. Members, no, I don't think so. Please allow Minister to conclude. Members, Minister William.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, an estimate for the asset tax give-up would be $8,364,000,000, which we will minus of the revenues of the opposition side of the ledger. Additionally, the opposition said they would not require any corporate taxes from MSMEs for 3 years. Madam Speaker, that's a give-up of $11.4 billion. Not for 3 years, in the first year, Madam Speaker. So we take that off of their ledger as well. The opposition also said they would take 1% of the taxes on the food import bill to put into a fund, so that would not be available for the central government's budget. And their own estimate is $2.5 billion, so we have to minus that off on their side of the ledger. And I have no quarrel with that figure. The opposition also said that they would increase the employer tax credit from 30% to 40% of tax chargeable. The cost. So the cost of that, Madam Speaker, would be a give-up of $3.4 billion. So now if we take a tally, their revenues and grants would now be $939,859,000,000 after all those give-ups. Madam Speaker, let's move on to the expense side of the ledger. So we are projecting that compensation of public sector workers, including pensions, wage negotiation, and items owed will be $495,799,000,000. I don't believe the opposition would want to meddle with this number, except to increase it if they believe they can. So I will put that figure on their side of the ledger as well, because we have to pay public sector workers. We get to the next line item under the expenses, recurrent programs. And for Jamaicans, recurrent programs are programs such as PATH, school feeding, Grand Store, 1,009 schools, school transportation, books for schools, supplies for hospitals and health clinics, restorative justice programs, child diversion programs, Grand Gala and other independence celebrations, Know Your Numbers programs, trucking of water, subvention to our universities and teachers' colleges, subvention to NSWMA for garbage collection, payment for streetlights, and so on. You get the gist of what is in this figure of $359.4 billion. And Madam Speaker, every dollar of it is already allocated to something. The notion that there is all this discretionary money is just that, a notion. Every dollar in the budget is allocated. The opposition would be free to look at these programs and decide which ones they're not doing or which ones they will cut back on because those are the only decisions that are available. So in the meantime, we put the $359.4 billion on the side of the ledger for the opposition as well. So we move to capital spending. We're estimating that we will spend $62.6 billion, Madam Speaker. We would love to spend more, but we have to work within a budget. And I will use the same figure for the opposition. If they want to cut it, keep it, or increase it, that's their prerogative. So we come to another tallying point. You will notice, Madam Speaker, on the government side, after paying public sector workers and recurrent and capital programs, not including interest on the debt and amortization, we have $178.313 billion left. The opposition has $22.088 billion left. But wait, Madam Speaker, there is still a long list of other goodies that the opposition promised. Yes, yes. The opposition promised to raise standards in early childhood and primary schools. There was no costing associated with this, but I would expect that they wouldn't spend any less than $1 billion. The opposition promised a daily lunch meal at primary and secondary for all children who need it. Madam Speaker, the government currently spends $9 billion for 200,000 children to get a breakfast, snack, and/or a midday meal. So it sounds like the opposition would want to at least double this to 400,000 children. All right? And so that would cost them an additional $9 billion. The opposition also promised a daily breakfast, but they said thereafter. And so I take that to mean in the next fiscal year, so I don't have anything projected there for that. Yes. Madam Speaker, the opposition promised transport subsidy for 50,000 students over 3 years. In this upcoming fiscal 2025-26, that would cost an additional $428 million, just using the current figures for the 7,500 children for whom the government provides transportation. The opposition also promised to increase funding for special needs, but no one knows how much. And so I don't think that they would want to invest less than $1 billion in our special needs students. So there it is. Then electricity. They too want to tackle energy poverty and put renewable grid in communities, among other things. No cost was associated with this. But I'm going to put $2 billion because when we announced our $1 billion prepaid meter, house wiring and inspection and $4,000 credit per month program, the opposition said it was not enough. Right? So we add another billion, right? Okay. Madam Speaker, the opposition explicitly said that they would give $1 billion to the creative industry. So that is on the side of their ledger as well. Now this one, Madam Speaker, one full scholarship for a university degree per family. Madam Speaker, I had to get out my Excel spreadsheet to do this one. And so if you'll put the chart up for the one full scholarship per family. So, Madam Speaker, the number of households in Jamaica are, well, it's 967,000. And when you read the literature, household is used as a proxy for families. So you can assume, you can correctly use this as 967,000 families in Jamaica. The number of students graduating from high school yearly is 35,000 students. And when you compare 35,000 to 967,000, you can pretty much see that there's a student coming from, families all across Jamaica. So, Madam Speaker, I made the assumption that the cost of tertiary per year is $900,000. I am sure I am underestimating. I am sure I am underestimating the cost of tertiary. But anyways, Madam Speaker, every student graduating from high school would want a full scholarship.
Is that right?
Yes.
Make university education all right.
And if you just take those figures, 900,000 times 35,000 students, because there's no student that's going to go to student loan to go get a loan, not when they can get a full scholarship, or they can get a full scholarship per family. Well, we have 967,000 families in Jamaica, so you must can get 35,000 one from them. And so, Mr. Speaker, when you take that and do the multiplication, other than saying one per family, Madam Speaker, there were no other stipulations, nothing. It was a blanket statement. It just said one per family. That was it. When the Prime Minister at our party's conference in November last year, when he announced that he was going to give $20,000 to persons who were not, collecting any benefit from the government, he gave conditions. He said that they would have to be registered at the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, who would vet them and so on. So he gave conditions. There were no conditions other than one per family to this promise. So, Madam Speaker, I did this calculation more than once. I did it more than once to assure myself that it was correct. You're talking about $31.5 billion annually, Madam Speaker. The opposition also promised to match the cost that companies invest in their employees. And again, Madam Speaker, you can do the calculation there because the data exists. On average, employers pay about $954 per worker. Average training hours, 57 for the year. We know what the employed labor force is, and we can, just take a percentage of that gets trained annually, maybe about 7% or so. The total spend on training would be about $5.1 billion, and since the opposition would fund 50%, that's $2.6 billion. The opposition said that they would match. Match means you give the companies money. Where would they get the money from? Isn't it the consolidated fund to invest in their employees? I don't know if they didn't know what match meant. But if I was an employer and the government says that they're going to match what I spend, I'd be expecting a check from the government. Okay. All right, so that's $2.6 billion, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the opposition also said that they would remove all taxes on laptops and tablets for students and teachers. Madam Speaker, I'm not one to boast, but this government, this Prime Minister Andrew Holness-led government has invested $8.2 billion in tablets, laptops, special needs schools. And Madam Speaker, at least $1 billion is committed annually towards funding our technology in education policy. It's targeted at people who need it. The opposition leader said they will negotiate package deals to provide teachers with free internet service as a tool of their trade. Madam Speaker, this government provides laptops, tablets, and other devices for students, teachers, and classrooms. Since COVID 2020, this government has issued out, free of cost, to students, teachers, and installed in classrooms 198,323 laptops, tablets, interactive panels, projectors, specialized equipment since we have been in government. Madam Speaker, since 2020, we've been rolling out broadband internet service to schools. Speaker, since 2020, we've been rolling out broadband internet service to schools at no cost to parents or teachers or students. As of today, about 680 schools have free Wi-Fi inside and outside of classrooms. And when we're done, every school will have Wi-Fi inside and outside. That's not a promise. That's a commitment. And we back it up with an annual allocation year in, year out. And oh yes, Madam Speaker, how could I forget? We have 379 community Wi-Fis or hotspots right across Jamaica. At the last count, the Social Development Commission, the SCC, the principal community organization agency working with communities, said there are 775 communities across Jamaica. So, Madam Speaker, if my math is right, that puts this Dr. Andrew Holness-led government at 49% of communities across Jamaica with community Wi-Fis. Never before in the history of Jamaica has this happened. So, Madam Speaker, the bottom line. The PNP's promises, and I didn't even take all of them into consideration, is $48.8 billion. $48.8 billion. So, Madam Speaker, let's do billion, 533 million, hold on, sorry, 300, right, okay, yep, 178 billion, 313 million. They would be left with a deficit of $26 billion. 26.7 billion. Madam Speaker, they would have trampled on the fiscal rules. The same one they told us that they codified in law. Oh, Madam Speaker, you don't see red ink yet? I didn't bring in the interest payment yet. We have an obligation to pay 177,533 million of interest payment. That is immovable. On the government side, we can make the interest payment, and we have 780 million left as a positive fiscal balance surplus. A small one, as I said when I opened the debate, but a surplus. And it sure beats the many years of deficit spending, that the opposition had when they were in government. Importantly, Madam Speaker, with our budget, we can go to the financial markets and borrow to refinance the $162,746 million of debt that will come due during the upcoming fiscal year. We project that we will be able to borrow a little less than what is coming due. On the opposition side, Madam Speaker, their implied budget cannot meet the interest payment. They would run a huge budget deficit of some $204 billion. Madam Speaker, the opposition went partying with the rent money. Madam Speaker, if they cannot make the interest payment, they certainly cannot go to the financial market to refinance the 162 billion 746 billion of debt that is due. The fiscal deficit that the opposition would run with all the give-ups and goodies violate the fiscal rule. It would send a shockwave into the financial markets. Those with money would run to convert their Jamaican dollars to US dollars. The dollar would fly. Interest rates would go sky high. Bond prices would tumble. The balance sheets of the financial sector would be severely weakened instantaneously because they have large holdings in Government of Jamaica bonds, and much of the bonds would be marked to market, meaning the financial sector would have to write down the value of their bond holding. Within no time, Madam Speaker, the Bank of Jamaica would have to hike interest rates to try to slow down capital flight. Madam Speaker, I am not exaggerating. It would be FINSA 2.0. Madam Speaker, with the budget that we've put forward, we can go to market, to the financial market, and borrow to pay off the same amount of debt. It's called rollover. We can do that because investors trust our budget. The Independent Fiscal Commission said our budget is credible and our budget is sustainable. We have indicated strongly by our numbers that we put to the public, to Jamaicans, that we will not run with it in an election year. And we put forward a budget that, when subject to interrogation, is not a run-with-it budget by any stretch of the imagination. Madam Speaker, would we want to give everybody more? Of course. We would have loved to announce that Jamaicans would get the threshold up to $2 million in 1 year, and that we're going to help 40,000 people instead of 20,000 to get their prepaid meters, and that we have a longer period for the accelerated capital allowance, and that the funds to DBJ would be 10 billion rather than 2 billion. We would have loved to make these announcements, Madam Speaker, but we knew that they would only feel good for a moment, and then the swift pain of a budget deficit would follow. And so, Madam Speaker, we remained faithful to our commitment that we would continue fiscal prudence. That we would continue fiscal prudence despite this being an election year with its many demands. And so I say to the opposition leader and spokesman on finance, get off your high horse about securitization. Call up NHT and tell them that you still really need that $4.4 billion. And the no corporate income tax for MSMEs, you should personally call up the head of the MSME Alliance and apologize for getting their hopes up, because you will not be able to do the 0% corporate income tax for 3 years. And then there's the 1% of food import tax and the employer tax credit. That is not going to happen either. So, Madam Speaker, I believe we have given the implied budget of the opposition a thorough interrogation, and the two words that I have for the implied budget of the opposition are the following. Not credible. If the opposition wants to refute this claim that their implied budget is not credible, then let them put forward a budget that can be interrogated. And Madam Speaker, you will note, Madam Speaker, that I did not even ask the opposition how they're going to implement the flat rate for water without bankrupting NWC. I've seen many creative ideas in social media about what persons would do to access the flat rate. But Madam Speaker, I will leave that for now. This I do know, Madam Speaker. The Jamaican people deserve more than promises and half-baked ideas. They deserve more than promises and half-baked ideas without the rigor of costings. As a country, as a people, we have matured in our thinking, Madam Speaker. And if it was not our parents or grandparents' thinking that have matured, it's the thinking of their children and their grandchildren and great-grandchildren that has matured and to which they have the benefit. And so I say to the opposition, Jamaicans deserve answers as to what kind of a budget the opposition would have in an election year. Madam Speaker, the opposition does not have to tell us right now in Parliament about their budget. They can think about it, Madam Speaker. The opposition does not even have to tell us next week or the following week. They can take their time, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, they sure need to tell the Jamaican people what are the numbers in their budget before the polls open on election day, whenever that day is, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I say to the Jamaican people, it's decision time. You have seen us work on your behalf since February of 2016. We're not perfect, and we don't always do the right things all the time, but we have a leader, a prime minister, who has a good heart. He comes from among you. Born and lived in a board house in Spanish Town. He comes from among you. The Prime Minister, he comes from among you. Born and lived in a board house in Spanish Town. Do you ever wonder why he personally goes out and hands out the keys for the social houses built of block and steel? Even though, Madam Speaker, there's so many other demands on his time, it's because he does not want another little Jamaican boy or girl to grow up in a board house and run the risk of being teased by another little Jamaican boy or girl who would say, Abe, you and your mother live in a board house. He wants families to be able to hold up their head about their living conditions. No big unfinished Operation Pride schemes without proper sanitation. No big unfinished Operation Pride schemes without proper sanitation. Madam Speaker, as I close, I want the MSMEs to know that we would be delighted to have their representative at the table as we deliberate on the micro market. I also got a word from the DBJ as well, Madam Speaker. They sent me a letter to say to the MSMEs that their loan fee financing for improved MSME access to credit products is designed to enhance financial accessibility and affordability for micro, small, and medium enterprises by eliminating the barrier of upfront loan-related fees. And so the DBJ is saying that they will integrate the loan fees into the principal loan amount, allowing borrowers to distribute these costs over the loan tenure instead of making an upfront payment. Madam Speaker, for all those who have written and have asked, Madam Speaker, for all those who have written and have asked about the cost of our package that we announced, or give up, or good news, it is $9.2 billion, and it is already accounted for in our budget. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, Jamaicans do not want a government that will party with the rent money, as the implied budget of the opposition has shown. You can be assured, that we will continue to be good stewards of the country's resources. And so, Madam Speaker, I say to all Jamaicans, it's decision time. And as you weigh us in the balance, may you find us faithful. Madam Speaker, all that we are and everything we have resulted from our humble beginnings. One from the board house in Spanish Town, and one from Ty Dixon, who used to carry water on her head with a cutter and walk to school barefooted many times. All that we are and all that we have, we owe it to Jamaica. We have no other place to go, Madam Speaker. And so I say again to all Jamaicans, it's decision time. Whom do you trust with your future? Do you trust those who don't know what the financial cost of all the things they have promised? Or if they know, they still put forward an implied budget that is not sustainable and not credible. An implied budget that would cause another FinSec. Whom with your future. It's decision.
No members. Members.
So as I close, Madam Speaker, I say to all Jamaicans, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. God bless Jamaica. Land we love. We choose Jamaica. Thank you.
Members. One behavior. Both sides.
Madam Speaker,
Members, Minister Williams still has something more before concluding.
Madam
Just allow her
Speaker.
to finish.
as we conclude the debate, I ask that the bill shortly entitled the Appropriation Act 2025 be read a second time.
The question is that the bill shortly entitled the Appropriations Act 2025 be read a second time. Clerk? Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Clerk?
An act to apply a sum out of the consolidated fund to service of the year ending on the 31st day of March 2026 and to appropriate the sums granted in this session of Parliament read a second time.
The House will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill clause by clause. Marshall? Thank you, Marshall. Members, please. I put clauses 1 through 3. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put the schedule, sections 2 and 3. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Members, the question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendments. Those in favor?
Madam Speaker, I now ask that the bill be read a third time.
Okay, so Minister, just one small item. We're back in the House. I do report the bill as having passed committee stage. And clerk, we just continue. The minister has asked that the bill be read a third time. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Clerk?
An act to apply a sum out of the consolidated fund to service of the year ending on the 31st day of March 2026 and to appropriate the sums granted in this session of Parliament read for a third time and passed.
Only some 8 going 9 years have always.
But is this real? Hey Greg, come look at this. Oh my, it's happening. Mr. Daniels, the numbers keep getting bigger and bigger.
Sir, the clicks are off the charts.
Hello, sales? What's the emergency? 9,000 clicks in one day? 3,000 order? So how much we have left? What? I soon call you back. Mr. Nakamoto, it's Danny from Jamaica. I need 5,000 of the big ones. We're back in business.
Yes, sir.
If there's any doubt in anyone's mind as to the veracity of what has been presented, the hard information presented has made the point and made it very well indeed. So, Madam Speaker, we have come to the end of perhaps the best budget debate that I have experienced, certainly as a member of this House. And we've been here in this House a little while. Member Samuda, and I call your name not in breach of the standing orders at all, but in reference to your years of service to this honorable House, as perhaps the longest serving member of Parliament anywhere in the Caribbean. Yes, but he's here. Isn't here at the moment. But I would because I'm sure he's watching and listening, I would.
But is this real? Hey, Greg, come look at this. Oh my, it's happening. Mr. Daniels, the numbers keep getting bigger and bigger.
Sir, the clicks are off the charts.
Hello, sales? What's the emergency? 9,000 clicks in one day? 3,000 order? So how much we have left? What? I soon call you back. Mr. Nakamoto, it's Danny from Jamaica. I need 5,000 of the big ones. We're back in business.
Yes, sir. Amplify your brand. Let Nationwide 90 FM assist you in tapping into a captivated audience